We're continuing our coverage tonight of that ever-developing story out of the White House. The U.S. President Donald Trump saying late this afternoon that the tariffs on Canada, the 25% tariffs on Canada, are coming this weekend, and said he would decide on whether or not to exempt oil tonight. We were talking earlier with former ambassador to the United States, Derek Burney, about how there's been a relative silence among Congress and at the state level, at both the political and business, in both political and business arenas, as to defending Canada's kind of involvement or interdependence with the United States and our economic importance to them. It's also been relatively silent, though. Melanie Joly, the Foreign Affairs Minister, says she's reaching out to our allies from our allies. Here at CTV News, we reached out to G7 embassies in Ottawa to ask for comment on both Donald Trump's tariff threat and his statements recently that Canada should become the 51st state. Here's what we heard. Italy and France, well, they just declined to comment. Japan said only that it was following with great interest what was going on. The UK and Germany, however, did offer more support, with the British High Commission writing in part, Canada is an independent sovereign nation, a member of the Commonwealth, the Five Eyes intelligence sharing partnership, and a NATO ally. And then Germany wrote us, tariffs would harm everyone. As Chancellor Scholz has recently said, the inviolability of the borders is a fundamental principle of international law. This principle applies to everyone. Borders, they wrote, must not be moved by force. The front bench is back to talk about that. Gary Dewar, Gary Marr, and Stephanie Levitt. Steph, I'll start with you. What do you make of the relative silence of our, so-called allies in the United States and our real international allies, for example, in the G7? Save for and except, especially Germany, but also the UK.
I mean, the obvious, right? No one wants to cross U.S. President Donald Trump. That he has made it very clear that those who disagree with him, in some cases, will be outright fired from their jobs, will be marginalized in public, will be dismissed. And while he doesn't, of course, have control, say, over the state governors of Minnesota or Wisconsin, or the places where our trade is really meaningful and essential to the economy there, certainly those governors want other things from him, and they need other things from him. And so we're in this delicate thing where the political pressure that could be applied to Donald Trump domestically, people are going to obviously need to do some political risk-benefit analysis there. Do I speak out on this issue? Well, what is the risk that means I'm not going to get federal funding for Y issue? The thing about Donald Trump, right, and these tariffs and this Make America Manufacture Again, well, if he wants to, let's say, bring home all of auto manufacturing to the United States, they would have to inject billions and billions of dollars into their own manufacturing sector, right? So states are going to be eager for that money. So you can see them almost gaming this out. Maybe it's actually better for me if I stay silent, because I'm going to get hundreds of billions of dollars in federal investment to build new factories and employ people in my state. That's going to win me re-election versus the pain of prices going up. That's a hard calculus to make if you're a politician.
What about our international allies, Gary Marr? And, again, take Germany and to a certain extent UK out of the equation, but the others who are just kind of either unwilling to talk or following with great interest. Do you think any of that changes if those tariffs are actually imposed versus just dealing with the threat of them?
Well, one of the things that I've talked about is how Donald Trump is not negotiating with Canada. He's negotiating through Canada. And what I mean by that is that, he is saying to the rest of the world, if I'm prepared to do this to my best trading partners, imagine what I'm going to do to you if you don't fall in line. I think the other thing that bears noting, though, is that Canada's significance and importance to other countries in the world has diminished over time. You'll recall that, Bob Ray, our ambassador, was unable to marshal up the requisite votes to get Canada a seat on the Security Council at the United Nations. And I think that has been part of a trend that Canada's relevance has diminished. We're not as important as we sometimes think we are to other countries. And in this case, if we're further isolated by reason of the United States, then it requires us as a country to think about how we're going to change that. We need to have sort of the short-term tactical elements to survive and, as best we can, muddle our way through what the Trump administration might do to us. But in the long term, we need to have a more strategic thought as to how we're going to become more relevant and more important to the rest of the world as a middle power.
Gary Dewar, you get the final word, and I understand all of what Gary just laid out about sort of the view of Canada in its trajectory over the last number of years. But I also wonder, like, what do our allies think is coming next for them? If the U.S. president is willing to do this to an ally, a close ally and friend, certainly Europe is in the line of sight at some point as well.
Well, certainly it is. And you mentioned the German chancellor. You've got a situation where they've got to worry about Mercedes and BMW and Volkswagen and other companies, some of them operating in the United States, all of them selling to American customers, Canadian customers. I just think back to the point that Stephanie and Gary Marr have made, we have gone down in terms of our credibility. We had great relationships when Brian Mulroney was prime minister, when John Chrétien was prime minister, when Stephen Harper was prime minister. They could relate with other world leaders. We have the situation with, unfortunately, with Justin Trudeau. He went to the Charlevoix summit and hosted it. And Trump came up there. If you run your tapes from the past, he said, maybe we should just he was on his way to meet the North Korean leader at the time. Maybe we should just get rid of all the tariffs. And I said to somebody I was sitting beside watching, I said, if that was Mulroney, they'd walk up with a pen and say, where do I sign? And if that was Chrétien, where do I sign? And if that was Harper, where do I sign? And he got up there and said, we will not be pushed around by this guy Trump, of course, which Trump watched on the airplane. So, and the old saying is, whether you're in journalism or in politics or labor, you don't burn a bridge. And he burned the bridge there. He promised to sign on to TPP in Japan. Then he headed off and didn't sign it. And then he had to come back and sign it. He hasn't got a very reliable relationship with other world leaders. And we've been fortunate to have good relationships with other world leaders. When you have a person, for example, like Bill Clinton, he would phone Jean Chrétien to help him get support for dealing with the French president. So we don't have that anymore. And we've got to, we've got to stop talking about our socks and start building relationships. Yeah.
I apologize. The last thing I want is for you to stop talking, but unfortunately the commercial hits very hard here and I have to take it. So I have to cut us off there. I do appreciate the discussion. Gary Dewar, Gary Marr, and Stephanie Levitz. We're back in a moment. Thank you, everyone.